Study of the Passion of Christ. Let's pick up in Mark 15. You can read with me verses 16 through 21. You'll find this. So the soldiers took him away into the place that is called the Praetorium. They called together the whole Roman cohort. They dressed him up in purple, and after twisting a crown of thorns, they put it on him, and they began to greet him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they began to hit him with a reed and to spit on him, and kneeling before him and bowing before him. And after they had mocked him, they took the purple robe off of him and put his own garments on him, and they led him away to be crucified. And they pressed into service a passerby coming from the countryside, Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. Very small passage to which I've entitled this message, "To Mock the King." You see, in looking at the passion of Christ, we often focus on the physical suffering. Our minds gravitate to the scourging and the nailing to the cross. And we see this today in many objects that people have, whether it's a cross that they wear, or shirts or whatever, that carry the image of a cross. Even paintings may depict the bloody and gruesome cross scenes occasionally. You see, the scene depicts Jesus affixed to the cross with large spikes in his hands or wrists, and we see a crown of thorns that has been pressed upon his head. Jesus is nearly naked, bruised and bloodied. It's quite the image. The truth is that professional executioners beat him mercilessly. However, the larger aspect of suffering was not physical. Today we're going to deal with one segment of that, and next week we're going to deal with yet a second aspect of non-physical. You're going to say, "Okay, preacher, what is that?" Well, it's spiritual, and today it's emotional and mental. But the spiritual for Jesus was being separated from God the Father. But he was also mocked and rejected by mankind. You see, the details of the physical suffering are limited to in the description by our gospel writers. It was commonplace at the time. However, the Holy Spirit guided the men who wrote the Gospels in what they were to record for us and others. But understand this, the disciples cannot see the spiritual suffering. You just can't see it there. But they can highlight, and they do, the mockery and the ridicule of Jesus. And the key word you'll find in verse 20 is the word mocked. It's the word in epian, or in epixan, which means to make fun of or to jeer. This mocking is meant to emotionally and mentally to make fun of somebody with all of the severity that can be brought to bear. And the authorities, Roman authorities particularly, but also the religious authorities, thought Jesus was a joke. This was beyond parody. You see, people who are daring enough to stand out will be mocked. Those who back then asserted their kingship were especially targeted. And this was no less true of the Romans and the Jews. I mean, after all, Caesar was a king, he's an emperor. And the Romans are at the hands or leading from the religious leaders are going to tune this mockery to outrageous proportions. You can see that in verses 18 and 19. Since Jesus was a Jew and Rome hated the Jews, they laid the contempt on very thickly. How so? Well, you've got to understand the greater context of the society during that day. So let's just think about that for a moment. The Jews and their sicarii would stab Romans, soldiers as well as citizens, out in public, maiming or killing them. Romans spent a lot of time rooting out the sicarii and other insurgents. But Rome also spent a fair amount of time, particularly in this area of Israel, putting down insurrections. And Rome was brutally efficient at it. Barnabas was one of these people captured in the insurgency, and he was imprisoned. Now, Jesus had predicted these events all the way back in Mark 10. Not that the Romans were going to hunt the sicarii, but that he would give his life as an atonement of sin, and this was just going to be a part of it. So just to catch up and to kind of as a review, Jesus has been apprehended. He was in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was taken to the high priest enclave. On one area was Annas, the other was Caiaphas, and they put Jesus on trial. Religious trial consisted of 3 episodes, with the 3rd episode happening early in the morning, at dawn, if you will, so that it would calm the legal minds of the Jews. What hypocrisy. Next, they deliver Jesus over to Pilate at near dawn, just after dawn, and Pilate receives Jesus so he can condemn him. Pilate interviewed and he tried Jesus. Jesus endured 3 civil trials. Pilate presided over the 1st and 3rd civil trials, and Herod was the one who presided over the 2nd civil trial. Pilate had come to the conclusion, even in the 1st civil trial, that Jesus was innocent. The religious authorities had successfully persuaded the crowd, if you will, to demand the release of Barabbas rather than Jesus, and to have Jesus executed. Pilate relents. We see that in our text. We're at that last point of the trial. He still has the sentence to level at Jesus. So what is he going to do? Pilate is going to make a mockery of Jesus. This is his last ditch effort before Jesus is led away for crucifixion. And it is meant as an insult to the Jews. And this is where we find ourselves in the text. Verse 15, Jesus is to be scourged. Pilate would scourge Jesus and then hopefully release him. Pilate hoped that the crowd and the religious leaders would show pity and mercy towards a beaten man, one who had been beaten to within an inch of his life. Scourging was horrific. The one being scourged might be stretched out on a table and then beaten, or tied to a pole and stretched out, or suspended between 2 ropes. Those were kind of the 3 ways that they kind of held you there. Then the lictors that's what they were, the Roman guard who did this, would begin to administer the lashes, and it would be done with a cat of 9 tails. You've heard that described before. It was a simple wooden handle, if you will, that would have leather straps attached to it, and within those leather straps there would be metal and bone and shot and other things, even rock. The skin would be abraded and literally stripped away. revealing bruised muscles and bone. Internal organs would often spill out due to the muscles being flayed and the bones being broken. You can kind of get that picture, right? Because if you're going to strip somebody down by beating them like that and the organs fall out, well, guess what? They're going to get beaten, lacerated, which is going to lead to organ failure. That's why many people did not make it through scourging. They died there because they were stretched taut when they were beaten. Verse 16 comes the praetorium. And this is point one, if you will, in our message. There's really just 2 points. It's the soldier's skit and Pilate's parade. Pilate calls for the whole cohort to come. That's 600 soldiers that would be in attendance. Now, Pilate only intended to detain Jesus in the palace until he delivered that final verdict of crucifixion or to let him go. The praetorium is massive. If you were to do some study on that, it could house literally 100 or so people in a gala type of setting. And that's what it was often for dignitaries of state and the parties, that sort of thing. And this is where we find Jesus. You see, the skit is going to be put on for the benefit of the soldiers. Understand this. Jesus, once he had been beaten with the cat o' nine tails, would have been reeling from pain and shock. There's no doubt about that. And what happened is that the skit involved Jesus being dressed in royal robes. The text says purple, but John in his gospel said they were scarlet. And what this was likely was a coarse woolen robe or a cloak that was issued by the Roman procurators to the soldiers. And they would wear them constantly, leading to their being faded and worn. And so it was likely that was given to Jesus, and so it's a red garment. They would have taken that and platted out a crown of thorns and put it upon Jesus' head. This was to mimic the laurel wreath that would go upon the head of a king. Again, remember, they are mocking the Jews, but they are mocking the Jews through Christ. Well, we know that the thorns would have easily penetrated the scalp with ease, and if you could kind of understand that if you kind of look at a thorn tree. Now, I don't mean the big ugly ones like what we have that look like they're kind of spikes. If you've ever seen them, that's absolutely crazy. I don't know that kind of thing was in Palestine, but they've got their own in the Israel area. But once he was dressed in that garb, the text says that they put a reed in his hand, Luke chapter 27. It's meant to resemble a scepter, right? It's meant to be that which has governing authority, right? And they mocked Jesus by bowing to him and saying, as you find in Matthew 27:28, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Well, the unseemingly gets larger. They beat Jesus with the same stick or reed. The Greek word is kalamos, which is a cane-like or a bamboo-like material. And they hit him a great many times over the head. Why? Well, it was prefigured in Annas' chambers. They did the same sort of thing to him. In fact, Isaiah chapter 50 verse 6 records this: "I gave my back to those who strike me, and my cheeks to those who pull out my beard. I did not hide my face from insults and spitting. And we know that they spat on him. And, even around the world, that is, spitting on someone is still a great act of disdain. Well, if you were to flip over to John chapter 19 and verse 4, it picks up on the story. He comes back to Pilate. I mean, he is just a bloody mess. And Pilate says this guy is not guilty. But he still treated Jesus with contempt. Maybe this is going to be enough to persuade the people. So what does he do? He parades people out. This is Pilate's parade, the second piece. He parades Jesus out and he says, "Behold the man." Kind of interesting that he doesn't say, "Behold your king," or "Behold whatever," right? He says, "Behold the man." That man, Jesus, is not a threat to anybody. But understand this, Jesus is not going to be released. God's plan, His will not be stopped. You see, the chief priests are not going to be dissuaded. In fact, they provoked the crowd. Remember, we talked about that last week, that they had seated the crowd with dissenters, and they provoked the crowd. "Crucify, crucify." These religious leaders indeed are hardened. Pilate yields to the cacophony of shouts. He says, "Take him yourselves and you crucify him, for I find no grounds for the charges of execution." The response of the chief priest is going to break Pilate, such that he carries out the execution of Christ. They say to him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God." This is the charge. Isn't it ironic? Pilate once again tries to get out of the way. John chapter 18, verses 8 through 11. He's worried because by that time his wife has sent word to him, "Don't have anything to do with that man." All of these things are mounting, and he understands where this viciousness is coming from. The chief priests, though, they demonstrate their depths of apostasy with one last trump card, and it's a doozy. If you release this man, you are not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar. It's over. Religious leaders and Pilate know what this means. What they're saying, in effect, is that we will face retribution from Caesar. However, Caesar will either replace you or execute you, or both. And so it's a fait accompli. That's it. It's over. The only action left is to condemn Jesus and move to execution, which, if you look at John chapter 18 and verse 13 with me, you will see that. John 18:13 says this, "And they led him away." Right? 18:13 talks about this prediction. 31. Yes. But it started out with the prediction, right? In 13 with Caiaphas, he shoots his mouth off. It's better for somebody else to die for us. And if you go all the way down to 31, there's this whole thing that goes on between then that we have just dealt with. But in 31, so Pilate says, "Take him to yourselves and judge him according to your own law." Their law was what? It wasn't crucifixion. It was stoning, but they were not going to defile themselves. He notes there, it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. So Pilate's parade dies out. Do not release to us this man, but release to us Barabbas. That's 18. When you go to 19 in John, you see the development of this drama. It keeps getting higher and higher and higher until finally in 19:13 you find this. Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, the words of, "You're not a friend to Caesar," he brought Jesus out. He sat down on the judgment seat, which is called the stone pavement, and he said, he announced to crucify him. So Pilate calls for the crucifixion detail. They were always at the ready. At about 9 a.m. Jerusalem time, that's when Pilate sits down on the pavement, pronounces Jesus guilty. His garments, as we see in Mark, were returned to him, and that robe was taken away from him, and he was led away by the crucifixion detail. Outside the gates, as they're taking him, Simon of Cyrene is nearby. Simon of Cyrene is pressed into action to bear the cross of Jesus. It would not be the whole cross, but rather it would likely have been the horizontal piece that he was tied to. Still heavy. Can't imagine being beaten like that and then taking a 4x4 and having to carry that thing for the length until you got to Golgotha. Jesus was exhausted. Had to be. Simon steps up. This is third point. It's Simon's sadness. God prompts Simon to meet the crucifixion detail. He's there for another reason altogether, likely business or something like that. It certainly is, a high holy day, the Passover, so he's probably there for that. He's a Christian from Tripoli. Matter of fact, Romans chapter 16, verse 13 tells us that Simon's children are believers, and those are known by the apostles. Specifically, Mark and other Roman Christians tell us about that. Here it is, dear hearts. This is the price of redemption. This is the price of forgiveness. You say, but I didn't have anything to do with that. Yes, you did. Your sin nature did. And if you were there, you would have been the same fickle crowd that was there, that welcomed him one day and and they shouted crucified on the end of the week. Why? Because sin nature is idolatry. You see, strife, violence, jealousy. Isn't that all going on in our scene that we've looked at? There's ambition. The high priests and their cadre want to keep their economic fiefdom going on. They and the people alike are saying in their own ways, I want to do it my way even if you must die. And that same thing is with us here today. Over the last week, how many people have died in and around us through shootings, violence, and such? And we don't have to go that far. We can say, oh, it's just over in the city of Louisville. And we go, yeah, but I live in this quiet little burg. Guess what? It happened. The same kind of attitudes happen here. Same kind of hearts are here. The same kind of hearts are next door. Matter of fact, the same hearts are beating inside of your chest. And that's what we say. I want it my way even if you have to die. Man hasn't changed. Or perhaps say, well, man, I wasn't violent or strifeful like that. Well, maybe you were a coward like Pilate, refusing to go along with the crowd, refusing to be politically maneuvered, guilted out, ashamed to acknowledge who Jesus is. Oh, well, I never done that, and Pilate never did that. He did. Pilate did do that. He says, what is truth? It's ubiquitous in our age. In our age, it's been cast to a whole different level. We have churchianity that has infected society too. You ask people, oh, do you know Jesus? Oh yeah, I know Jesus. Man, he and I are tight. But they'll never darken the pages of a Bible. They will never come into a meeting house. Oh, but I know Jesus. I know him, Pastor. I am good. You see, the message that we have to tell people is repent and believe in this. Folks, do you realize that the Scripture is being fulfilled right in front of us as it was back then? You want to know how I can tell you that based upon the authority of God's Word? Because Jesus says it himself when he's in the upper room giving the upper room discourse. He says it's going to be like the days of Noah. People are going to be marrying, giving in marriage. They're going to be doing all this stuff. And they don't understand, much like they didn't with the time of the flood. They're just going to party. It's life as usual. Nothing. There's no serious evangelism. There's no serious heeding of the message that Noah had preached for 90 years. It's business as usual. We're going to be here tomorrow. Jesus says he's going to come like a thief in the night. The last time I read, and I read about these things frequently, thieves do not announce they're coming. They don't go, I'm here to rob you. All of a sudden the dogs are barking and there's a crazy person in your house. And maybe they're armed up, maybe they're not. And we've seen that too, right? Not just over there, but here. I want what I want when I want it, even if you have to die. You see, we have the gospel to take to people. The seriousness is that we're standing on the door. Who knows when Jesus is going to come? I can't say He's coming tomorrow or next week or 2 weeks from now. But I understand that when He said that He's going to come like a thief in the night, He's not going to advertise Himself. He's just going to come. All of a sudden it's going to be, I'm here. But yet we're going to walk around like we've got all the time in the world. Oh, it's just exactly what Peter wrote. Things are the way they are, and they've been that way, and they've been all the way. They're going to continue to be that way. People go around like that. They're in a stupor of the age. They're asleep, and yet we won't bother to wake them up with the gospel. That's why I can say that many are just like these people who said crucified Christ. The only question is, we who have Christ, are we going to tell people about the best thing that ever happened to us? That's what He's going to ask us. We talked about that a week or so ago. What do you do with Jesus? What do you do with Jesus? What did you do with Jesus? Do you keep Him in a safe at home? And, you know, He's almost like my grandmother's silver that she only got out once in a great while until she got towards the end of her days. And you have to understand, as a kid, I only seen that silver at the place setting and all the china and everything like that probably maybe a dozen times over the course of my life. And then as she's going to die, you know what she does? She starts using the china every day and starts using the silver every day. Isn't it funny how we get? That's how fast things turned for Reba this week. Friday at about 10 o'clock in the morning, she's gone. Earlier that week, she was okay, as you can be in Green Meadows. You know, the same thing happened to you. The only question is, are you going to have planted Christ wherever you go? That's a great commission. Go. Wherever you're going, take Him with you. Drop Him off. People that don't want to share, people that don't want to divulge, people that don't want to seem obligated, people that aren't friendly, people that are religious people, give them Jesus. I was dealing with that with Nate this week. He was making a whole evangelism thing just overly complicated. Just thinking that he's got to have, you know, the entire Bible memorized before he goes at it. I said, no. No. I said, you've listened to too many who have made that complicated. So what did I do? I said, here are 2 questions that I want you to memorize, and I texted it to him. It's all the things that you have heard when we studied Share Jesus Without Fear. I gave him the first 2 questions. I said, you ask them, do they have any spiritual beliefs in it? Shut up and let them talk. Then ask him, who is Jesus to you? Shut up and listen to him talk. And wait for God to do what He's going to do. He looks at me all queer like, that's it? I said, that's enough. In each case, well, let's just take the total since we're being, we want to be big about it. 12 words. That's it. That's all you got to have is 12 words.